Hello and welcome back to Deep Sleep Creep's YouTube channel. Today we're going to be listening to 3 more horror stories. If you enjoyed listening to it, please consider commenting and subscribing. So get comfortable and let's begin. It was a dark and moonless night. The kind of darkness that gets really lonely really fast when you're driving as long as I do. I had been on the road for hours, hauling a load of goods across the state, and fatigue was beginning to set in. The hum of the engine, the rhythmic thump of the tires, and the long, windy, empty roads had made me that much more sleepier. I had these caffeinated beans I would regularly take when I want to pull in an all-nighter. Later in my drive, my GPS told me there was a stretch of road ahead undergoing construction, and that I'd needed to take a detour. Little did I know that this detour would lead me down a path I would never forget. The detour took me onto a winding, narrow road, its surface cracked and rough from years of neglect. The air felt different here. It was heavy with an inexplicable tension. My truck's headlights cut through the inky blackness, illuminating the twisted branches of trees that seemed to reach out and grasp at the road. As I continued down this unfamiliar path, doubt began to creep in. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed a turn somewhere. I glanced at the GPS screen, and it flickered briefly before redirecting me down an even smaller road, one that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The road was unlike any I had ever seen. It was unpaved, a narrow dirt track that wound its way deeper into the forest. The tall trees on either side cast eerie shadows, and the silence was deafening. Roots from the trees went as far as to stretch onto the dirt road. That's how narrow it was, to put things into perspective. And then I saw him. At first I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. A figure emerged from the darkness up ahead, walking along the side of the road. He was dressed in a long, dark leather trench coat that billowed in the wind, and an old hat that looked like it belonged to a different era altogether. I knew the golden rule of truckers: never pick up hitchhikers. It was a rule hammered into me from the day I started driving, and I'd heard enough stories to know why. People out here on the road could be seriously disturbed, and I had no intention of putting myself in danger. Especially since I have never been on this road before, and according to my GPS, it was hours from a local town that I thought, why would someone be walking out here? Which was even more of a reason not to pick him up. So I kept my foot on the gas and passed him by, hoping he would get the message. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him recede in my rearview mirror, his silhouette growing smaller and smaller until he disappeared into the darkness. With a sigh of relief, I continued down that eerie road, the feeling of unease settling in the pit of my stomach. What seemed like forever was only 30 minutes, and I saw no signs of civilization or even another vehicle. It was as if the road stretched on forever, leading me deeper into the heart of the unknown. And then I saw him again. It was impossible, I thought, my heart sinking. The same figure, the man in the dark leather trench coat and old hat, was up ahead on the road once more. Needless to say, I had goosebumps all over my body and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My first instinct was to slam on the brakes, to demand answers from this strange hitchhiker who seemed to be playing tricks on me. But logic took over as I reminded myself you never know what anyone else is capable of and who they might be with. Especially on a dark and unknown road that had no sign of civilization other than the mysterious hitchhiker. I tried brushing this off, until it happened again. This pattern repeated itself several times. I would pass the man, convinced he was nothing more than a figment of my imagination, and then he would reappear down the road, as if purposely trying to make me go crazy, and it's working. He kept reappearing over and over again. I felt like I was genuinely going insane. My heart was probably pounding at least 200 beats per minute. I was hallucinating, I thought to myself. No way this is real. I'm just really tired and am seeing things. This cannot be real. My nerves were frayed and my truck seemed to groan in protest as I continued down that never-ending road. Every hair on my body stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a glimmer of light up ahead. It was a small town, and I knew I had reached my destination. I pulled into the truck stop, grateful to be back in civilization. I slept in my cab that night, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hitchhiker. I did finally drift off to sleep, but I was having nightmares about him. In my dreams, half his face was burnt off and he was smiling with his thumb up. I felt the heat on my face and woke up in a panic, only to realize I was still safely in my cab, but felt like I was being intensely watched. The next morning, I joined my fellow truckers at a nearby diner, hoping to shake off the lingering unease of the previous night. Over cups of coffee, I recounted my strange encounter with the hitchhiker in the dark trench coat. One of my buddies raised an eyebrow and asked, "Were you driving on Jeremy Swamp Road?" I thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think that was the road." He exchanged a solemn look with the others before leaning in closer. "You're lucky you didn't stop for him, man. That road has a history and it's not one you want to mess with." Confused and intrigued, I asked, "Okay, I'll bite. What history?" My friend leaned back, a haunting look in his eyes. "They say that the hitchhiker on Jeremy Swamp Road, he's not real. He's a ghost, a restless spirit who roams that road looking for unsuspecting truckers. Legend says he was a trucker long ago. He ran out of gas on that road and had an extra gas container in his cab. Well, he went to go get it and started putting the gas in the gas container. Then he lit a cigarette while filling up the gas, and it burned half his face off, and he died. Legend says those who stop for him, they disappear without a trace, never to be seen again. No one knows why or where they go, but they say it's a fate worse than death." Chills ran down my spine as I absorbed the story. The thought of possibly escaping a dark fate haunted me. From that day forward, I avoided going on that road. I make sure that if there is construction that I would go a different route or sleep and figure out another way tomorrow. I never want or will go down that road again, and I made sure of it. The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt that disappeared into the inky darkness of the night. The hum of the engine and the rhythmic thump of the tires were my only companions on this lonely stretch of road. I had been driving this route for years, hauling cargo from one end of the country to the other, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. It was a moonless night, and the only light came from the dim glow of my dashboard. My eyes were heavy with fatigue, but I couldn't afford to stop. The deadline for my delivery was looming, and I had miles to cover before dawn. As I rounded a bend, I saw a figure up ahead, standing in the middle of the road. I squinted, trying to make out what it was. At first, I thought it might be a stranded motorist, but as I got closer, I realized that it was something far more sinister. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white gown. Her long dark hair hung in disheveled strands, and her eyes were wide and vacant. She stared at me with a haunting intensity as I approached, and a chill ran down my spine. I hit the brakes, bringing my rig to a screeching halt just inches from her. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at this eerie apparition in the middle of the road. What was she doing out here in the middle of the night? I leaned out of the window and called out to her, "Hey, are you okay?" There was no response. She just continued to stare, her eyes unblinking. I was about to get out of the cab and check on her when I heard a sound that sent shivers down my spine. It was a low, guttural growl, like nothing I had ever heard before. It seemed to come from all around me, as if the very air itself was vibrating with malice. I quickly rolled up my window and locked the doors. My heart was racing, and I fumbled for my phone to call for help. But there was no signal out here in the middle of nowhere. The woman in the road suddenly moved, her body contorting in unnatural ways. She let out a high-pitched, inhuman scream that pierced the night. It was a sound that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, my truck roaring to life. I had to get out of here, away from this nightmare. But as I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw something that made my blood run cold. The woman was no longer alone. A horde of figures had emerged from the shadows, and they were chasing after my truck. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and their movements were jerky and unnatural. I pushed my truck to its limits, the engine straining as I barreled down the highway. But no matter how fast I went, they were right behind me, their screams and growls echoing in my ears. I had no idea what these things were or why they were after me, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to find a way to shake them off my tail. I swerved onto a side road, hoping to lose them in the labyrinthine network of back roads that crisscrossed the countryside. But they were relentless, following me every step of the way. It was as if they knew every move I was going to make before I even made it. I glanced at my fuel gauge and cursed under my breath. My tank was almost empty, and I couldn't keep this up much longer. I needed help, and I needed it fast. As I raced down the dark country roads, I spotted a dilapidated gas station up ahead. It was my only hope. I pulled into the lot and skidded to a stop, throwing open the door of my cab and bolting for the building. The gas station was deserted, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I could hear the creatures outside, their footsteps getting closer and closer. I had to find a way to defend myself, to buy some time. I rushed to the counter and grabbed a can of gasoline, then doused a rag and lit it on fire. It was a makeshift Molotov cocktail, and it was the only weapon I had. The creatures burst into the gas station, their eyes fixed on me with a hunger that sent a shiver down my spine. Without hesitation, I hurled the flaming rag at them, and the fire erupted in a blaze of heat and light. The creatures screamed in agony, their bodies writhing and contorting as they were consumed by the flames. I watched in horror as they burned, their unearthly cries echoing in my ears. But even as they burned, their eyes never left me, and their screams turned into a chilling, mocking laughter. It was a sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. With the creatures distracted by the fire, I made my escape, racing back to my truck and tearing down the road. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of a nearby town, where I finally found a signal and called the police. They arrived at the gas station, but there was no sign of the creatures. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only scorched earth and a sense of lingering dread. I tried to explain what had happened, but the police didn't believe me. They said it was just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and stress. But I know what I saw that night, and I know it was real. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that those creatures are still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for their next victim. And I can only hope that I never cross paths with them again. The road stretched out before me, a never-ending ribbon of asphalt illuminated by the soft glow of the moon and the dim headlights of my truck. I'd been driving for hours, making my way through the lonely stretches of the highway. I was hauling a valuable cargo of electronics headed for a distribution center in the next state. The monotony of the road had begun to lull me into a trance-like state, and my mind wandered as the miles passed me by. I had been a trucker for years, and I thought I'd seen it all. But little did I know that this night would be different, more harrowing than anything I had experienced before. As I cruised along the highway, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror, its headlights piercing the darkness. At first I thought nothing of it. After all, the highway was a busy place, even at this late hour. But as the miles passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the car was following me, staying just a bit too close for comfort. I adjusted my speed, trying to create some distance between us, but the car matched my every move. I sped up, it sped up. I slowed down, it slowed down. I even went slow enough that a normal car would have passed me by. I went as low as 50 miles per hour for a while, before I realized he was not going to pass me. Panic began to rise within me, and I reached for my phone to call the police, but the signal was weak and I couldn't get through. The car's headlights seemed to glare at me intensely in the mirror, and I could see the silhouette of the driver behind the wheel. My unease grew as I realized the driver's face was obscured by a mask. I knew I needed to find help, and my mind raced as I considered my options. I spotted an upcoming rest area on the highway and made a snap decision to exit, hoping that being surrounded by other people would deter my pursuer. As I pulled into the rest area, I glanced around, relieved to see a few other trucks and cars parked there. I hoped the presence of witnesses would discourage the car from continuing their pursuit. I watched anxiously as the car that had been following me slowed down as it approached the rest area. However, my relief was short-lived. Instead of passing by, the car pulled into the rest area, parking a short distance away from my truck. The driver remained inside, their masked face hidden in the shadows. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I'm a bit of a hothead and have been known to have a real bad anger problem. I grabbed my flashlight and bat and climbed down from the cab of my truck, making my way toward the car. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached, my flashlight beam trembling in the darkness. I knocked on the driver's side window, my voice firm, accompanied by pure rage, and demanded, "Hey, what the hell do you think you are doing? Why are you following me?" The driver remained silent for a moment before rolling down the window. What I saw sent a shiver down my spine. The masked face that greeted me was expressionless, and the eyes that stared back at me were cold and calculating. Before I could react, the driver reached into their jacket and pulled out a gleaming knife, its blade catching the faint light. Panic surged through me and I stumbled back, my flashlight falling to the ground. I sprinted back to my truck, my heart racing as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help. But before I could dial 911, a voice from behind me froze me in my tracks. "Don't even think about it." I turned to see another figure standing right behind me, blocking my escape. It was the driver's partner, and he was holding a gun, his expression just as cold as the other. "Get out of the truck," the masked driver ordered, their voice low and menacing. With no other choice, I climbed out of my truck, my hands raised in surrender. The two assailants approached me, their weapons at the ready. They forced me to lie face down on the pavement, their eyes never leaving me as they rifled through my belongings, looking for anything valuable. As they searched, they taunted me with threats and insults, their voices filled with malice. It was clear they were professionals, and they had done this before. After what felt like an eternity, they seemed satisfied with their loot. They ordered me to stay down, warning me not to move for at least 10 minutes, or they'd come back for me. I lay there, my heart heavy with fear and humiliation, as I listened to the sound of their car speeding away. When I was certain they were gone, I slowly got back up and dusted myself off. I knew I needed to call the police, but I also realized I had no way of identifying the assailants. All I had seen were masks and heard their voices. I reached for my phone, hoping to get a signal and make the call, but sadly, I realized they took my phone too. With no other option, I climbed back into my truck and started the engine. I needed to get to the nearest police station as quickly as possible. As I pulled onto the highway, my mind raced with thoughts of what had just happened. The following day, I sat in a police station, recounting the terrifying events to a detective. He assured me they would do everything in their power to track down the assailants, but I couldn't shake the feeling of shame and humiliation. It wasn't until weeks later, as the police investigation unfolded, that I learned the truth. The two assailants had been tracking truckers for months, targeting drivers who were hauling valuable cargo. They operated with ruthless precision, always staying one step ahead of the law. I shuddered to think of the countless other truckers who had crossed their path and fallen victim to their sinister game. I had been lucky to escape with my life, but the memory of that night would forever haunt me, a reminder of the dangers that lurked on the open road.